PlayStation.
Oh, whoo! All right. What's up, everyone? True Techno Gamer here, and it's time. It is time. We have finally made it. You know what it is. I got to talk about it. Today, it's official. PS5 Pro. Sony has finally officially announced and unveiled this thing. Gave us a lot of information in a short 9-minute technical presentation by Mark Cerny himself. Now, a lot to get into here. Hopefully I can remember everything at this point. This is literally take 3 of this video. I've tried to record this video 3 times, had technical issues and had no audio at one time, and I just, working, and they were doing construction around my house that was noisy and all of this stuff. Now it's all dark. I initially did this like 30 minutes after the presentation ended. It was fresh, it was hot. Now it's later that night, but I'm still gonna try to get this out, pretty soon here. So let's discuss. So PS5 Pro, what do we have? What do we know? And what are the key takeaways here? So first of all, PS5 Pro will be available this holiday. November 7th is the date for, are you ready for this? You're not ready for this. For $699 US. And that is sticker shock to the fullest, right? I mean, that is literally the most expensive debut for a console, I think. I mean, other than going way back until stuff like the Neo Geo and the 3DO initially, really obscure things that quickly dropped in price, by the way. But $699, that does not include a disk drive. You guys hearing me? That does not include a disk drive. So if you have a disc-based PS5, you want to upgrade to the Pro. The Pro is digital only. You have to get the add-on disk drive that Sony makes. That they sell separately, and you can do that for an additional $80 before taxes. In addition, it does not include the vertical stand. Vertical stand sold separately. So, I don't know. What does that mean? I mean, if you want to stand your PS5 vertically, the initial PS5 came with the actual stand thing in the box. If you want to stand your PS5 Pro vertically, you got to get the stand separate, which I believe is only like $20 or $30, but still. And then if you don't get a stand, could the console even rest horizontal? Like, I don't think so. Like, how does that work? I think it needs the stand to rest. So that's kind of weird that they would force that on you. That's not cool. I'm hoping I'm wrong and there's a way that it could at least, kind of sit horizontally on its own. But yeah, so if you put it all together, and if you have like a disc-based PS5 and you wanted to get an apples to apples upgrade to the PS5 Pro, you are looking at over $800. People admittedly are freaking out. What the hell? What is going on with Sony? Has Sony lost their minds? They're saying that the presentation was horrible because, ultimately it's just not something that is going to be very accessible to a lot of people. But that's the point, right? All right, let's talk about that. So first of all, before we get into all the nitty-gritty stuff with the price, look, if you are someone who's been paying attention to this world in gaming and computer hardware and software services, this should not be that much of a surprise. Everything has been going up in price. Literally everything. The parts, the cost to manufacture these consoles, in fact, have not gotten cheaper over the 4 years that the PS5 has been on the market. They have gotten more expensive. How do we know that? There's an unprecedented case here where in the 4 years that the PS5 has been on the market, see, typically in the past, look at any previous console generation just about, especially ones pre-PS4. A console would come out at whatever price, and it would consistently go down. When the console generations were 5 years, you would see 2, even 3 price drops in 5 years. PS1, PS2, they dropped 2, 3 times in the 5 years, 5, 6 years of their life cycle before the new consoles came out, right? And that was pretty standard. By the time, the PS2 came out, the PS1 was $99. By the time the PS3 came out, the PS2 was, I think, roughly $99 around there, $129 or something like that, right? But I mean, that's typically how things have gone. Now, if you're paying attention to the world today, in the economics and inflation and just shortage of parts, still, I think a carryover from the pandemic and such, prices are going up across the board, which is why we have today multiple non-flagship GPUs that are retailing for over $1,000 on the PC. Just for the GPU, multiple non-flagship GPUs that are retailing for over $1,000. What the hell with that, right? PS5 around the globe has gone up in price multiple times in the last 4 years. Not down. They've done like temporary price drops here and there, I believe, but Sony has increased the price. So the digital version launched at $399 and the disc version launched at $499. The digital version has gone up, I believe now is generally speaking in most markets $450, and the disc version is usually closer to $550, in general in most markets. It's gone up in price in 4 years. They just announced a few weeks ago that the price of the PS5 is going up in Japan by a significant amount, like not like by a few dollars. It's crazy the world we live in, but that's the world we live in. You look at, Microsoft, right? They are releasing just a new SKU of the Xbox Series X, same Xbox Series X, same console, but a new SKU with a bigger hard drive. So they're going from 1 terabyte to 2 terabyte, special edition kind of thing for the holidays this year. Okay, did you see the price on that? This is the same Xbox Series X that launched at $499, right? 4 years ago. With a 2 terabyte hard drive now, the price is increased to $599. So that package of the Xbox Series X with a 2 terabyte hard drive is $599. Now think about this, guys. If you're paying attention to that and you see what's going on, you see that the price of the consoles has not gone down at all in 4 years, and in fact has gone up. And you look at the landscape and you say, oh, the competing console that's roughly equivalent is $599 with a 2 terabyte hard drive, right? So how can Sony release a actual legitimate higher spec console? This is not just an upgrade in the hard drive. The hard drive in the PS5 Pro, by the way, is 2 terabytes as well. So that alone would have probably put it closer to $599, right? So now on top of that, you have much higher specs that we'll get into in a second, right? Bigger GPU, machine, NPUs, neural processing units built in now for machine learning processing, right? To run this new AI upscaling, we'll get into. There's a lot going on in here. And again, and double the hard drive size. Of course it's going to be higher than $599, right? I mean, you think about it, it's going to be at least $650, and they push $699 because they want to make sure they get some margins on these things. And because, again, they're bleeding like everybody else. They need to make money with these things, right? So they'll take the hit, not subsidize anything like they typically do in consoles, and try to make that money. It sucks for us. We lose as gamers by and large but it's not Sony's fault. This is the world we live in, right? This is if they want to make money, they're going to be losing money on that console if they try to sell it for $599, right? It would have been nice, but again, their goal isn't to sell masses of PS5 Pros. That's not their goal. Okay, we'll get into that too. But okay, so it is sticker shock. It's going to go down in history. A lot of people are complaining about it. If you don't want to pay for it or can't pay for it, it's not for you. I mean, it's very it's that simple. But there are reasons for it, and the reasons are understandable if you follow what's going on here. So that's the price. Now, what else did we get? Now, Mark Cerny in the presentation talked about the three key pillars in terms of the specs and the technology of what PS5 Pro is bringing to the table. And that actually is not a coincidence, because if you've been following this, and I think I mentioned this on this channel as well, the code name for the PS5 Pro for the last year plus internally has been Trinity, right? Code name Trinity. What is Trinity? Well, Mark Cerny laid it out. These three key pillars are larger GPU. They talked about the GPU basically having 67% higher compute, which, like the leak specs said, that I talked about in the channel as well, that amounts to 60 compute units, 60 CUs. That's up from only 36 in the PS5. Okay, so that's a pretty sizable bump, right? That's 67% in terms of raw compute power, right? They've also talked about 28% increase in memory bandwidth. They increased the memory bandwidth from 448 gigabytes per second up to 576 gigabytes per second. You need to have an increase in memory bandwidth if you're going to have a much bigger GPU like that in order to feed it. However, as you probably noticed, the memory bandwidth increase is not linear, is not to scale in terms of how much the actual compute power is increasing, right? So because of that, it's a safe bet that a lot of games that are GPU bound are probably going to be memory bandwidth bound. And how do we know that? Because that's why Sony has said that when you put all of that together, the actual rendering speed increase is only about 45%, because the memory bandwidth is not increasing to the scale of the actual compute power. If it was simply a matter of just compute power, you would get close to 70% increase at least, right? But memory bandwidth is a thing. That's still a nice bump, right? For sure. So Trinity, that's what it's about. What is it not about? What didn't you hear? You didn't hear anything about the CPU. Okay, now this is important, guys. A lot of people have, even with the leaks that were going on beforehand, people were complaining about this. Oh my God, because the leaks pointed to there not really being a CPU change either. And people wanted Zen 4 and Zen 5 and 12 cores instead of 8 cores, whatever. It's the same Zen 2 8-core 16-thread CPU. Why? Because they don't need to upgrade the CPU. Why don't they need to upgrade the CPU? Because the vast majority of PS5 games in this generation are in fact GPU bound, which is contrary to the PS4 generation, where the vast majority of games back then were CPU bound, because the PS4 CPU was pretty anemic, as we all know. Okay, the PS5, that Zen 2 8-core 16-thread is nowhere near being saturated. It's not. Games now are pushing much higher geometry, much more complicated lighting and ray tracing. That's all GPU stuff. And we know that because we see games, when they have to go from fidelity to performance mode, right? What's the first thing they do is they lower the resolution, the internal rendering resolution. You don't see changes in FPS if you change resolution when a game is not GPU bound. Right? For example, the proof is in the pudding in that regard, right? And the fact is, and I'm saying this again, and I've said this on this channel, and it really irks me and boils my noodle when I hear people talk about how Sony and Microsoft overpromised this generation and underspec these consoles, because they're so weak and they're already being oversaturated and all of this stuff. And it's like, it just breeds ignorance. You obviously don't know what it entails to build, make a console, and what goes into that and what goes into the hardware, the timing aspects, how much in advance you're designing and building this stuff. The fact of the matter is, at the time, pretty much right up to the time where the PS5 and Xbox Series launched, and I'm just going to group them together and say that, roughly they were delivering a 2080 level of, GPU performance. And they were the fastest GPUs that AMD had on the market at that point. The only thing that AMD had on the market, which came out that same time, that same year, was the 5700 XT, which both consoles were faster than. All right, the 2080 right up until launch was literally the third fastest GPU in the world, consumer GPU in the world. Right, there was 2080 and then 2080 Super and then 2080 Ti. 2080 Ti clearly outclassed it. 2080 Super, you could start seeing some games hit that level of performance, depending on if it's like an AMD optimized title and that sort of thing. But broadly speaking, we're looking at 2070 Super. 2080 is kind of like that sweet spot. That was the third fastest GPU in the world at the time. Now, right at the time when the consoles launched, of course, that was when NVIDIA came out with the Ampere line, the 30 series cards, the 3080 and 3070, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, those cards were faster. But again, Sony, for years up to that point, designing and developing, putting a stake in the ground to get that level of quality and actually be able to build that in mass production and deliver on that by November 2020 with ray tracing capabilities built into the GPU. Okay, with on the PS5, 2.2 gigahertz, which was so much faster than we've ever seen on the console space. Look, they did the absolute best that they could. And the problem, like I said, if there is a problem with this generation, is not the hardware, right? The hardware is actually amazing. The most balanced consoles we've seen from both sides. So it's just ignorance to say that, and it really just irks me because, again, we're getting the best performance, and I've said it before. The fact of the matter is, this generation of consoles, 98+% of games have a 60 FPS mode, meaning that they have a mode where they run at 60 frames. You care so much about frame rate, which according to Sony's own data, which they showed in the presentation here, 75% of people typically choose performance mode. Okay, so if you care about frame rates, you have a performance mode, and that's not limited to smaller, simple games. The biggest, most graphically complex games we have seen this generation have had a 60 FPS performance mode on the Series X and the PS5. We're talking Black Myth Wukong arguably being the best looking game of this generation, right? We're talking Avatar last year, Frontiers of Pandora. We're talking Alan Wake 2. We're talking Horizon Forbidden West and Ratchet and Clank with ray tracing enabled. Spider-Man 2 with ray tracing enabled. 60 frames per second on that measly base PS5. I've said this before, you cannot, and I dare you to try to do it, please do in the comments, but you cannot give me a list of 20 games that have come out this generation in the 4 years since these consoles have been out of the nearly 1,000 native games that have released so far on PS5 and Xbox Series. Give me a list of 20 games that are solely limited to 30 frames per second. I dare you. Solely limited to 30 frames. I'm not talking about having a 30 frames per second mode. I'm saying basically no 60 FPS mode. It doesn't exist. I dare you to try it. Yes, you're going to point to things like Dragon's Dogma and Gotham Knights, I think, right? I mean, there's a handful. But even games like, A Plague Tale Requiem, Starfield, Redfall, these games that launched at 30 frames per second were later patched with a 60 FPS update, which again proves the point. It's not a hardware thing. It's a software and a resource and a manpower thing, right? But if the developers want to do 60 frames per second, they can. Now, here's the whole point of the PS5 Pro, guys, right? And this is what this presentation is about. PS5 Pro's mantra and the ultimate goal is to remove the decision that gamers have to make today on a base PS5. When you play a game on a base PS5 today, you typically have to choose between fidelity and performance modes, right? And, pretty much every game, the big games, the small games. There's some games like Astrobot, okay? Great game that just came out. It's 60 FPS, it's 4K, it uses dynamic resolution scaling, but it goes up to native 4K from native 1440p-ish, and it's 60 frames per second perfect. There's no options, there's nothing to change there, and that's pretty good, right? Because some games have gotten really out of hand with that stuff, honestly. They have just way too many modes. I remember like Hogwarts is pretty complicated. Ghostwire Tokyo had a lot of modes, VRR on and off, and balance mode, performance mode, and fidelity. I mean, it does get complicated in certain games, and now we're getting into PC territory, which is not the point of a console, right? So I like the idea of streamlining that. The idea they're saying is, look, let's do a single pro mode that will combine the best in terms of the image quality that you can get from fidelity mode that typically only runs at 30 frames per second on a PS5 base. Let's take that quality and then run it at 60 frames per second, which is typically the performance mode on a base PS5. So combine both worlds, and then ideally there would just be a single pro mode. You're running on a pro, bet, right? A 4K like image, it might not be native 4K, but it will be close to looking like 4K to your eye. It will be a lot sharper and clearer, at least than the current performance modes that we get on the base PS5. That's for sure. while still running at 60 frames per second. And that's what Trinity is about. We don't need the CPU upgrade because, again, the CPUs are not being saturated. These games are not CPU bound. And we know that because, like I just said, the vast majority of games, more so than in any other generation in the past, the vast majority of games are, in fact, running at 60 frames per second, or at least have the option to do so, including the biggest games, UE5 games. Yes, the problem is that when they do that, they have to lower resolution, in some cases, to an unacceptable level, or at least a level that really doesn't look that great on a nice big 4K screen. And they're using, currently using AMD's FSR upscaling, which isn't great either, especially when it has to work at really low resolutions. So how do we remedy that? Well, that's where the AI-powered upscaler that Sony has created, it's their own proprietary solution, and they call it PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. And the cool thing about that, the acronym is PSSR. And the cool thing about that is, this is the first time we're seeing actual machine learning, as a dedicated native feature on a console. So, there's machine learning. There's neural network processing that is actually part of the PS5 Pro that the base PS5 does not have. And they use that to offload, the main CPU and GPU to do the processing necessary for this AI upscaling. So the idea is that this software AI-powered upscaler will be able to reduce the load on the actual GPU. The GPU can render at a lower resolution, and this AI processor will fill in the gaps and deliver a super resolution image. So, for example, internally, the GPU is only rendering at 1080p, but what you get output is a 4K image that, using machine learning, that trained algorithms on various images, type stuff like that, very similar to DLSS for folks playing with DLSS on a PC and NVIDIA, GPUs. You can get an image that looks pretty darn close to native 4K, and in some cases look even better than native. That's the promise, and that's what we've seen realized, at least on the PC side. So hopefully PSSR, we haven't seen a whole lot of it in this presentation, but hopefully it can deliver on that promise. It at least should look much better than AMD's FSR solution, which has literally ruined the image quality of a number of games. Like, legitimately, just ruined the quality. So anything better than that is improvement. Final Fantasy 16, Dead Space, I remember Hogwarts, Forspoken, the list goes on and on. Final Fantasy Rebirth, 7 Rebirth. A lot of games for FSR is not great, especially in motion and especially at low resolution. So PS5 Pro, increase the resolution because you have the larger GPU, give you that raw horsepower to just increase the resolution, increase the graphics fidelity, using the PSSR to fill in the gap to deliver a much higher resolution image with much better clarity and detail, but for lower cost, which means that game can still run at 60 FPS or higher. It's basically being more smart about it, right? Because you can't just brute force your way with hardware anymore. As we see, hardware is still super expensive. And even though the GPU is only roughly 50% larger, remember the PS4 Pro GPU was 2.2 times larger than the PS4, okay? So even with just 50%, the price, $700, right? Coming from, again, the digital PS5 is supposed to be $399. It was at launch, at least, right? So, gee, we're almost doubling the price for the Pro. Are you kidding me? The PS4 Pro launched at the same price as the original PS4 did, at $399, right? That's what happened there, right? So what are we doing? What world are we living in? That's the reality of the world today, right? So the third piece here, of course, is advanced ray tracing. And we knew this from the leaks. And one thing to take away from all of this is that I was wrong. I thought that the leaks that, was being reported for, the last few months from the leaked internal, Sony development portal, I thought that there would be some differences there. Not to say that that was all wrong. I just thought that some of it might have been out of date or some of it was just more incomplete. Now, we still haven't gotten a full detailed list of the specs. Like, we still don't know the clock speed of the CPU and the GPU. If there is any bump, if there is this turbo mode that was rumored, what the final, teraflop ratings are and stuff like that. They didn't talk about, like, the cache sizes. Again, we got some of that information from the rumors and the leaks, but Sony didn't say anything about that today. We didn't get that level of detail today. But in general, though, from what we have seen and what they have said, it matched almost exactly with what the leaked document said. So I was wrong about that, and that's one key takeaway. If you want to get the details, just look up what the leaks were saying, and we're pretty much right on. But the leaks pointed to 2 to 3 times increase in ray tracing, in extreme cases, even up to 4 times better ray tracing performance in the PS5 Pro. And that's pretty cool, and that's pretty significant. That's one of the bigger pillars, again, part of the Trinity that we're talking about here. One of the biggest gaps between the console and the PC today is the ray tracing performance, quite frankly. A lot more games are using ray tracing, and the console GPUs, as they are, just can't keep up. So this is a pretty cool thing. Now, ray tracing could make a big difference in your games. You talk about, people are saying the difference doesn't look that much. They can't see the advantage of the PS5 Pro. Well, if they have additional ray tracing and high quality ray tracing in there, that will show up. You'll be able to see the ABs in most cases for that. So that would benefit a lot of games potentially, right? Games like Black Myth Wukong and Star Wars Outlaws that recently came out. Sony didn't mention this in this presentation today, but I would be really surprised if they're not working on patches, whether it's available day one or sometime shortly thereafter. But I'm pretty sure that those games are coming with a pro patch. But yeah, those games rely heavily on ray tracing, and that's a big part of the reason why on the base PS5 and those games the resolution is really low to hit 60 FPS, right? And the 60 FPS performance isn't very stable either in most cases, at least. So PS5 Pro should help games like that tremendously. Even games like The Witcher 3, the definitive edition, I think they call it, whatever. The updated version that added the ray tracing. Some of the ray tracing was missing on the console versions because, again, performance, right? So stuff like that could be added in. Spider-Man 2, which uses ray tracing by default. You can get high quality ray tracing in that. I'm sure Ratchet and Clank, they did show that. They can do again, better ray tracing at higher frame rates. So that should be awesome. They also already mentioned GT7, which has great ray tracing in every part of that game except for the actual races when you're playing the game. Because again, performance, the game is running at 60 when you're racing. So the ray tracing goes off, and they use fallbacks. So now they've said you can get ray tracing in game. That was a key target for them, right? Ray tracing in game for GT7 is going to be a reality now. So there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of benefits for certain games, that can definitely benefit from these three things. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, I've already played all those games. The games that they showed are old games. And their PS4 games, a lot of cross-gen stuff, Horizon and GT7 technically as well, whatever, right? That's all true. And guess what, guys? If you played the games already, then you're done. Don't worry about it. This isn't for you, right? Like, it's that simple, okay? If the price is too much for you, and you're like, there's no games to play on, it's not for you. If you're someone that, that has a discerning eye, and wants the utmost performance, there's a lot of games out there that will be much better experiences if the Pro delivers what it's saying it could on them. Like I said, I named a few games. Like a lot of games this year have come out that are not cross-gen, right? On the PS5 alone, just look at the release list for the year. Okay, Helldivers 2, that's not cross-gen. Rise of the Ronin, that's not cross-gen. Final Fantasy Rebirth, that's not cross-gen. Stellar Blade is not cross-gen. Okay, Black Myth Wukong is not cross-gen. Tekken 8 is not cross-gen. Star Wars Outlaws is not cross-gen. Astrobot, that just came out, is not cross-gen. We're not seeing, many cross-gen games coming out, especially the AAA stuff. And then we still got Silent Hill 2 coming later this year. We still got Call of Duty Black Ops 6, of course, coming later this year. And we got Assassin's Creed Shadows coming later this year. All right, they did show Assassin's Creed getting a pro patch. I'm guaranteeing Call of Duty will get a pro patch as well, and Silent Hill 2 will also have a pro patch. And whether, again, if it's not available day one, it will be shortly thereafter. But all of those games will have meaningful benefits because you won't have to worry about the 30 FPS mode anymore. For one, that in of itself is going to be a big difference. And yes, the base PS5 will have 60, but it probably will not be nearly as stable, and it won't look nearly as clear and as good because it's going to be running at a much lower resolution. So if you're into that kind of stuff and care about the quality and you have this nice big 4K TV at home, you're going to benefit a lot from the PS5 Pro. all right? And you're gonna want to be up there day one or day two or something close, right, to pick it up for sure. Um, Personally, I already have a large backlog of games because I can't keep up and I don't have time to play games like that. When these games are all 100 hours long and all this crap, I don't have time for all of that. But there's still a lot of games I want to play, and I legitimately avoided getting certain games because I knew that the Pro was coming out later this year, and I knew I would enjoy it a lot better on it. So some games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, absolutely going to play that game. Didn't touch it. I know the performance mode was already looking pretty bad on the base PS5. I'll wait. It should be a lot better on the PS5 Pro. Star Wars Outlaws, another game I do want to play. Didn't touch it. Black Myth Wukong, blowing up the world, right? Or what is it? Oh, well over 10 million, probably almost 20 million units already in a couple of weeks. I didn't touch it. I do want to play it, but I'll wait for the Pro because I don't. I choose to play on console. I prefer console over playing a lot of these type of games on a PC. Even though I could, I have like no less than 4 PCs. But I prefer console. I'm a console gamer primarily, so I'm gonna play it on this and enjoy it, right, in my home theater, right? That's the point, right? That's the point. Now, this console, PS5 Pro, is not for everyone though. It's not, and Sony knows that, and they're not shying away from that. $700, $800 again if you want to get the disc version, basically. Um, there's no launch titles for the Pro because it's still a PS5. There's why you need launch titles. The launch titles are the games that are coming out on PS5. Like I said, there are new games coming out on PS5 later this year, and a whole bunch of new games coming out next year that will surely be pushing the limits of the base PS5, and could benefit from the Pro. Obviously, GTA 6 is the big one that everyone is, of course, being aware of. But there's going to be a lot more first party stuff. What is Naughty Dog doing? When we see Ghost of Tsushima 2 from Sucker Punch, those games are going to be huge PS5 games, and yeah, they're going to have performance and fidelity modes, but on a single pro mode that gives you the best of both worlds. That's awesome, right? That's an awesome thing. Is it $700 awesome? That's for you to decide, right? That's for you to decide. But you don't need launch titles for a mid-gen upgrade. The launch titles are the new games that are coming out for the base system. And for all the people like me that still have a lot of games that they have not played, for the base system, well, now it's a great time to get it. Games that came out this year that you might have missed, or games that you may be in the middle of playing it, you can play it with better quality now. Absolutely. Who wouldn't want that? Right? You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't get it. People just complaining about everything. It's not for everybody. In fact, I already hit submit that the PS5 Pro will be even more niche than the PS4 Pro was. Right? That would make sense. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because simply that the base PS5 is already so good. It's doing so much. There isn't a jump from 1080p to 4K like there was in the PS4 generation. The PS5 is already doing 4K. It's capable of doing 4K. Now, obviously, some games don't quite hit it, but we're still in the 4K era here, right? The selling point here is an 8K, even though both systems technically, the Pro and the non-Pro, will technically be able to do or output 8K. But doing that practically with any game, right, is going to be very few and far in between. Although apparently GT7 has a mode on the Pro to actually run at 8K. We'll see. CNET, had a special hands-on on the PS5 Pro today, and he mentioned that, right, that he played the GT7 on an 80-inch screen in 8K, and it looked glorious. Okay, well, we shall see. Obviously, it's not native 8K, most certainly, but if PSSR can do 8K and make it look, pretty representative, great. If you have one of the two people that have an 8K TV, absolutely go run with that, right? But the PS5 is already, again, 4K 60 is already a very real thing on the PS5 base. So, there isn't as much room to grow. But because of that, the extra horsepower, I think, will be just actually utilized in a more meaningful way that we can see the differences. Again, adding ray tracing effects is a good difference, right? And in some cases, getting better image quality will be really noticeable. I will say here that in my humble opinion, and I'm someone that bought the PS4 Pro day one and was excited about it at the time, but honestly, in retrospect, I think it was largely a waste of time, guys. I said it. I think it was largely a waste of time. It was wasted. I think the Xbox One X did a much better job with the whole mid-gen upgrade in terms of being something that was a meaningful jump up that you can really see. But again, because it used the same CPU as the PS4, even though it did increase the clock speed quite a bit, actually. Meaningful upgrade. I think it was like 30% a clock speed increase. Most everything was still limited to 30 frames per second because the CPU was still so bad, and everything was so CPU limited. Right? The big thing with the PS4 Pro was the increase in the GPU being 2.2 times larger. But that kind of, fell flat because, first of all, they're trying to go from 1080p up to 4K, which is a 4 times increase in pixel count, and thus a roughly 4 times increase in the GPU load. But the GPU is only twice as fast, right? So they can't get up to 4K with that GPU, right? In pretty much no case, for one. And then for two, again, most games were CPU bound. So if games are still CPU bound, then you're still not going to be able to, really see much of a performance benefit, with that bigger GPU, right? So you're still limited to 30 frames per second. And the reality was, even though, Sony tried to add this checkerboard rendering thing, which the idea for checkerboard rendering was you want to go from 1080p to 4K. And you can't do it. It's a 4x increase. But you got a 2x increase in GPU because that's physically what they can deliver in that time frame for a reasonable price. So the 2x GPU will get you from 1080p to roughly 1440p, which is what we saw in the vast majority of PS4 Pro games. And then the checkerboard rendering could be used to then fill in the gaps from 1440p to 4K and give you something that was supposed to look relatively representative of 4K. But in practice, checkerboard rendering was almost never used, even by Sony first-party studios, because the quality just wasn't there. And even for the few games that did use it, it was really mixed results. Some games looked horrible with it, and some, like Red Dead Redemption and Final Fantasy 15, looked horrible with it. And some games looked pretty good, like obviously God of War and Horizon looked pretty good, right? So that was the idea. PS5 Pro is following a similar model. The PSSR is kind of like a really new and advanced version of what checkerboard rendering was supposed to do, right? Be able to fill in the gaps, put less of a load on the hardware because you don't have the hardware to ultimately deliver a certain level of quality. But the difference is we're not going from 1080p to 4K, right? We're already at 4K or near 4K. We might be going from 1440p to 4K. We might be going from 1800p to 4K in some cases, right? Like that's where we're at in a lot of cases. So it's not nearly as big as much of a jump. The raw hardware in many cases will be able to get you to native 4K on the PS5 Pro. But in those really extreme cases where the performance mode is already down to sub 1080p, well, that's where the AI upscaling can come in. Raw horsepower will give you a little bit higher base resolution, and then the more advanced upscaler will still be able to deliver higher quality 4K. That's the idea, right? I think it will, ultimately be awesome. I think it will benefit a lot of games. I absolutely don't think it's a necessary thing. The base PS5 is still great. And most people that don't care about this stuff, that don't count pixels, that don't count frame rates, that are looking at frame counters on the console, that's kind of the nature of console, most people don't care about that kind of stuff and they wouldn't notice a lot of that stuff. So it's not for you. If you're fine with the PS5, there's nothing wrong with the PS5. That's still the base platform. Everything's still going to be good there. So all the people that's kind of being so cynical about, well, in the presentation, Sony's showing, slightly clearer images around the crowds in Ratchet and Clank, and like IGN folks will say, oh, I didn't even notice crowds were in the game. Like, who looks at that stuff? It's like, trees look clearer in Spider-Man 2 and stuff like that. First of all, don't completely judge, these games from this 1080p YouTube, compressed YouTube, live stream, right? We're going to see more direct images, I'm sure, later. We're going to be able to play this stuff in person. I guarantee you the difference is going to be noticeable, in most cases at least. But is it night and day? No, right? It's not going to be night and day, but it will be noticeable. It will be clearer, and it will feel a lot better and be smoother. That's the point, right? They're not trying to make it night and day, but they are trying to just amplify what the base PS5 experience is, and I feel like they're doing that. And they can do that for a price. Indeed, for a price. But I feel like they are doing that. So, don't need to be cynical. If you don't feel like the differences, are big enough for you, guess what? Again, price, not a big difference. It's not for you. Right? Don't bother. Keep your PS5. This isn't about trying to sell mass units here. People, how is Sony going to draw people into the PS5, at this price point? That's going to deter more people. Well, yeah, it will deter more people. They're absolutely right. their goal isn't to do that, right? Again, they are constrained by the laws and economics of the world that we live in today, right? Sony doesn't want to do this. Believe me, they could reduce the price of the PS5 and have it, increase in sales about 200-300%. They absolutely would, right? But they can't afford it. They're still running a business, right? And Microsoft is too. Xbox is as well. Nvidia is as well. AMD is as well. Intel is as well. You hear the stories. All of these studios, all these companies are laying people off, struggling financially, right? You hear the struggles. The stuff is real, right? So then you say, well, why even bother with a PS5 if you got to release it for PS5 Pro, right? If you got to release it for such a high price, and it's going to be so limited and so niche because most people can't afford it, and most people aren't going to appreciate the differences, then why bother? That's a great question. I would say again, it's not necessary for Sony. They could have just foregoed it, honestly, like Xbox apparently is. But the fact that it is there, it does exist, is ultimately going to be a beneficial thing for the PS5, enthusiasts. I'll say, right? That if you are a PS5 enthusiast, that you game on PS5 primarily, and you are a discerning person that care about the highest quality graphics and performance, this is for you. You don't want to play on PC, or you don't have a PC to play on, this is for you. If you game on console, game on PS5, but you don't care about the setting, quality, performance, this is not for you. If you're someone who already games on PC and PC is your platform, this ain't for you either, right? Because you're gonna say, oh, I already got a better PC than that, higher specs, cheaper, that can still do. Okay, well, good for you. Enjoy it. Right? It's not for you. That's simple, right? So again, that market of people I'm talking about that I would be a part of is probably smaller than the people that would gobble up the PS4 Pro. Also, keep in mind that nowadays most games on PS5 are going to be coming out on PC either day one or probably within about a year or so. So if you are a PC gamer, before you had to say, well, I got to get a PlayStation because there's so many cool games I want to play on there. Really, that's not the case anymore because those games are going to be coming to your platform as well, right? So that does even make less incentive for people to migrate over or get a PS5 Pro. Of course, if something like GTA 6 comes out next year, as advertised, and they already said the PC version won't be there day one, probably won't be for another 12 to 18 months after it launches on console, and the only consoles you have at the time are the Xbox Series S and X and the base PS5 and the PS5 Pro. Guess what? The best way to play GTA 6 will be on the PS5 Pro. And I guarantee you, for a game of that size and magnitude, there will be a ton of people that will buy a PS5 Pro just to play that game in the best quality and the best frame rate possible. And that makes perfect sense. It'll probably have more advanced ray tracing features, again, higher resolution and higher frame rate than what you'll see on the base PS5 and on the Xbox Series consoles. So that kind of stuff will come. Sony will release some big AAAs. Naughty Dog will release something. Santa Monica will release something. Sucker Punch will release something. Housemarque will release something. The list goes on and on. All the Sony studios will coming out the gate. Sony Bend, whatever. And those games, especially the big single-player AAA games, are not coming to PC for a while. If you're a dedicated PC gamer, this ain't for you anyway. You will wait if you want to play those games. I get it. But if you're someone who kind of plays on PC here and there, but primarily is a PlayStation person, that's who this is for. If you are that person, you will be happy come November 7th, and I hope you enjoy it. As will I. I will be there pretty much day one if I can. I will absolutely get it. Enjoy it in my man cave. Enjoy it in my home theater on the big screen. And again, I have a lot of games that I've been saving up to play on that, so I know I will be having a great time. But it does suck. The price is sticker shock. I am surprised about not including a disc. Having to get that separate. I am surprised about that. Hopefully we'll learn a little bit more details. We will be seeing a lot more on the games front. Do not despair. They did show a lot of old games. They will just give you sneak peeks. There is supposed to be a state of play that will actually be next week. And a lot of what we see there will obviously be PS5 Pro enabled. Probably not everything, but we'll see some third-party stuff. We'll probably see some first-party stuff. And a lot of that stuff will be PS5 Pro enabled, of course. TGS, the Tokyo Game Show, is also happening this month. There already is word that Death Stranding 2 will have a pretty big presentation there. Guarantee you it will be PS5 Pro enabled, and they'll talk about that finally now that the cat is out the bag. So look out for that. There will be other games. I'm sure we're going to see probably more Silent Hill 2 from Konami. We're going to see Capcom talk about some of their games. Probably see, again, a bunch of other stuff. Maybe see something from Sony first party as well in Japan. So PS5 Pro, cat is out the bag. So game developers can talk about it now, and they absolutely will. We'll hear a lot more games being planned for patches between now and November. So just stay tuned. A lot of happening. Yeah, it's a surprising day, but it's here, it's real, and again, if you want to take your PS5 gamer to the next level, this is the way to do it. So what do you think? Are you completely turned off by the price? Which I'm sure a lot of people are. No go for you. Do you think that the overall specs and what it can bring is just not that compelling? It's not a big enough jump? That's perfectly valid as well. I want to hear from you. Please comment in the comments. I want to hear from you. Let's talk about it. So till next time, True Techno Gamer, signing off.